Hey fashion friends! I want to start today's video with a question. Have you ever put on a pair of high-rise jeans and felt like something wasn't quite working, but you couldn't explain why? Maybe the jeans fit perfectly. Maybe they're the right size. Maybe they're even the exact pair you've seen recommended over and over again. But when you put them on, the outfit just doesn't create the effect you expected. And what I find interesting is that so many women have had this experience. Because if you spend any amount of time looking at fashion content, you'll quickly get the impression that high-rise jeans are the answer to just about everything. Need a new pair of jeans? Try high-rise. Want to look taller? Try high-rise. Want to feel more polished? Try high-rise. And while high-rise jeans can absolutely be beautiful on some women, one thing I've noticed is that they don't create the same effect on everyone. Some women put them on and immediately feel longer, more balanced, and more confident. Other women put the exact same rise on and feel like something shifted in the wrong direction. Maybe their torso suddenly looks shorter. Maybe their hips feel more prominent. Maybe the outfit feels heavier than they expected. So why does this happen? That's what I want to explore with you today. We're going to talk about why high-rise jeans work so beautifully for some women, why they feel frustrating on others, how torso changes the way they interact with the body, how curves affect the overall silhouette, and how to tell whether a particular rise is helping your proportions or working against them. Because one thing I've learned is that when an outfit doesn't work, many women immediately assume the problem is their body. I've heard it countless times, and I've caught myself doing it too. We see something look amazing on another woman, we try it on ourselves, and when we don't get that same result, our minds immediately start looking inward. But many times, that's not really what's happening. Sometimes the issue isn't the jeans, and it isn't your body. Sometimes it's simply a matter of understanding how a particular silhouette interacts with your proportions. And once you understand that, getting dressed becomes a whole lot less frustrating. I remember buying a pair of high-rise, wide-leg jeans because I loved the way they looked online. The woman wearing them looked elegant, balanced, effortless. It was exactly the kind of outfit I was hoping to recreate. So naturally, I ordered them. And when they arrived, I put them on, stood in front of the mirror, and immediately realized I was not getting that same result. The jeans fit, the size was right, nothing was technically wrong. But I remember looking at the outfit thinking, why doesn't this look the way I thought it would? My torso looked shorter, the outfit felt heavier than I expected, and somehow it wasn't creating the same balance I had seen in the photos. And that's when I started asking more questions. What was creating that difference? Why could the same pair of jeans look incredible on one woman and completely different on another? Was it body shape, torso length, curves, something else entirely? Because I had a feeling there was more going on than simply finding the right pair of jeans. And the more I paid attention, the more patterns I started noticing. I noticed that women who wore the same size could have completely different experiences in the same pair of jeans. I noticed that torso length seemed to matter more than most fashion advice talked about. I noticed that curves changed the way denim sat on the body. And I noticed that a lot of women were blaming themselves for results that were actually being created by proportion and visual balance. That's why I wanted to make this video. Not to convince you to wear high-rise jeans and not to convince you to avoid them, but to help you understand what's actually happening when you put them on. Because once you understand what's creating the result you're seeing in the mirror, it becomes much easier to make styling decisions with confidence. And in my experience, that's where real style confidence starts. Not from following more rules, but from understanding yourself a little better. A high-rise jean raises the visual waistline. That's really its main job. When the waistband sits higher on the body, your eye naturally reads the legs as beginning higher. And because your eye is reading the legs as starting higher, the legs appear longer. That's the effect people are usually referring to when they say high-rise jeans are flattering. And to be fair, they absolutely can create that effect. But here's the part I think gets left out. Whenever something gains visual space, something else loses visual space. So if the legs appear longer, the torso will naturally appear shorter. It's a trade-off. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. For some women, that's exactly what creates balance. But for other women, that's where things start to feel a little off. Because if you already have a shorter torso to begin with, and then you visually shorten it even more, you may start feeling like the proportions of the outfit have shifted in a direction you don't love. And this is usually the point where women start saying things like, I don't know why, but I don't love myself in these high-rise jeans. Or something about this outfit feels heavy. Or I feel shorter somehow. And what's interesting is that they're often noticing a real visual change. They just haven't been given the language to explain what they're seeing. Now let's talk about the factor that may influence this more than anything else. torso length. And what's interesting is that a lot of women don't actually know whether they have a short torso, a longer torso, or fairly balanced proportions. Most of us aren't walking around analyzing our proportions every day. We're just trying to get dressed. But once you start understanding torso length, a lot of outfit frustrations suddenly start making more sense. Two women can be exactly the same height and have very different torso proportions. And that's one reason fashion advice can feel so inconsistent. One thing I've noticed is that women with longer torsos often respond really well to high-rise jeans. And it makes sense when you think about what we just discussed. High-rise jeans visually lengthen the legs and visually shorten the torso. So if a woman naturally has more visual length through her torso, that trade-off often creates balance. Now let's look at the opposite situation. If a woman already has a shorter torso, that same rise can sometimes create a very different result, because now we're shortening an entire area that already has less visual space to begin with. And this is where I hear comments like, "I feel like my waist is right under my bust," or "I feel like my torso disappeared," or "everything feels crowded through the middle." And if you've ever felt that way, you may be noticing something real. Not because the jeans are bad, and not because your body is wrong, but because the visual balance may be shifting too far in one direction. One thing I wish more women understood is that proportion isn't a problem to fix. It's simply information. And I think that's an important distinction, because once you understand your proportions, you can start making intentional choices instead of feeling like you're guessing every time you get dressed. Now, torso length is only part of the story, because there's another piece that can dramatically change how high-rise jeans behave, and that's curves. Specifically, the way hips, thighs, and waist definition influence visual weight throughout an outfit. And I think this is where things start to get really interesting. So now let's talk about curves, because this is another factor that can completely change how high-rise jeans look and feel on the body. And I don't think this gets talked about enough. A lot of fashion advice tends to treat high-rise jeans as if they're creating the same visual effect on everyone. But once you start paying attention, you realize that curves often change the equation. When I say curves, I'm talking about things like fuller hips, fuller thighs, a defined waist, or more visual shape through the lower body. And none of those things are good or bad. They're simply part of the overall silhouette, but they do affect how clothing behaves. One thing I've noticed is that women with curves often describe their clothing differently than women with straighter silhouettes. For example, a woman with fuller hips may say, "These jeans feel heavy on me," or "I feel wider than I expected," or "The outfit just doesn't feel balanced." And what's interesting is that those feelings often have less to do with size and more to do with visual distribution. Let's think about what high-rise jeans are doing. They're raising the waistline. They're creating structure through the middle of the body, and they're drawing attention upward toward the waist area. Now, if you combine that with fuller hips, fuller thighs, structured denim, and sometimes a wider leg shape, you can end up with a lot of visual weight concentrated in one area of the outfit. For some women, that feels amazing. The outfit feels anchored, polished, intentional. But for other women, it can start feeling a little overwhelming, almost like the outfit is asking the eye to focus on too many things at once. And I think this is where many women start feeling frustrated, because they know something feels different, but they don't always know how to describe it. They just know they don't love the result. And sometimes they assume that means they need to lose weight, or that they need a different size, or that something is wrong with their body, when really it may be a silhouette issue, not a body issue. One thing I started noticing when I looked at outfit photos was that the same high-rise jean could create completely different visual effects depending on how much natural shape the woman already had. A woman with a straighter silhouette might put on the same jeans and gain a lot of definition through the waist. A woman with a naturally defined waist may already have that definition. So the high-rise jean isn't creating the same benefit. It's creating a different effect altogether. And that's one reason blanket fashion advice can be so misleading, because the starting point matters. Think about it this way. If two women are trying to create balance, they may need completely different tools to get there. One woman may benefit from more waist emphasis. Another woman may already have plenty of waist emphasis and need more visual length instead. One woman may need structure. Another may need softness. One may need definition. Another may need less definition, and neither approach is more correct. They're simply solving different styling challenges. This is something I wish more women understood. Fashion isn't really about finding the universally flattering piece. I honestly don't think such a thing exists. It's about understanding what a particular garment does, and then deciding whether that effect supports the look you're trying to create. If you've ever put on high-rise jeans and thought, Why do I suddenly feel wider? That doesn't necessarily mean you look wider, but it may mean the rise is concentrating visual attention in an area you weren't expecting. If you've ever thought, this outfit feels heavy, it doesn't necessarily mean the outfit is bad. It may mean there's more visual weight collecting in one part of the silhouette than you'd prefer. If you've been listening to this video and thinking, okay, Wendy, I think I might be one of those women who struggles with high-rise jeans, the first thing I want to say is that's completely okay. Because this isn't really about whether high-rise jeans are good or bad. It's about understanding what effect they're creating and deciding whether that's the effect that you want. One thing I've noticed is that many women assume they only have two choices. Either wear high-rise jeans or don't. But there are actually a lot of other options in between. And sometimes the solution is much smaller than people realize. For example, one of the most overlooked options is simply trying a different rise. Not necessarily low rise, not necessarily ultra high rise, just somewhere in the middle. A good mid-rise jean can often create a very different experience, especially for women who feel compressed in higher rises, because a mid-rise doesn't take as much visual space away from the torso. There's often a little more breathing room, a little more balance, and for some women, that's all it takes. Another thing I've noticed is that sometimes the issue isn't actually the jeans. Sometimes it's everything happening around the jeans, and this is where styling becomes important, because a high-rise jean paired with a very cropped top, a thick belt, bulky shoes, and a lot of structure can create a completely different visual effect than the same jean paired with a softer top, a more open neckline, a little drape, and lighter visual lines. The jeans didn't change, but the overall balance of the outfit did. This is something I think many women miss. We often blame a single piece when the entire outfit is contributing to the results. And once I started looking at outfits as complete systems instead of individual pieces, things started making much more sense. Because most of the time, there isn't one piece solving everything. It's the interaction between the pieces. If you genuinely love high-rise jeans, I don't want this video to convince you otherwise. If you put them on and feel amazing, that's wonderful. Wear them. Enjoy them. Keep styling them. This video isn't about creating new insecurities. It's about creating understanding. But if you've been trying to force yourself to love a silhouette that never quite feels right, I think it's worth giving yourself permission to explore other options. Maybe that's a mid-rise. Maybe it's a different leg shape. Maybe it's softer styling. Maybe it's simply recognizing that what works beautifully for someone else doesn't necessarily need to become your personal uniform. I think that's one of the most freeing realizations in fashion. And that brings us to the bigger lesson behind the entire conversation. As we've been talking about high-rise jeans throughout this video, I hope one thing has become clear. This conversation was never really just about the jeans. It's about understanding why certain things work for some women and not for others. Because so much fashion advice is built around finding the best piece, the most flattering jean, the perfect dress, the ideal shoe, the one item that's supposed to work for everyone. But one thing I've noticed is that fashion rarely works that way, because we're not all starting from the same place. We have different proportions, different preferences, different lifestyles, different things that make us feel confident. And that's exactly why two women can put on the same outfit and have completely different experiences. One of the most helpful shifts I made in my own thinking was moving away from asking, is this flattering? To asking, what effect is this creating? Because those are very different questions. When we only ask whether something is flattering, we're often looking for a yes or no answer. But when we ask what effect it's creating, we start paying attention. We become more observant. We start noticing patterns, and that's where understanding begins. For example, instead of saying, these jeans don't work for me, you might find yourself saying, these jeans create more structure than I want. Or, this rise shortens my torso more than I'd like. Or, this silhouette feels heavier than the look I'm trying to create. Those observations are much more useful, because once you understand the effect, you can make the adjustments. You're no longer guessing. You're making decisions with intention. One thing I've learned is that confidence usually doesn't come from finding the perfect outfit. It comes from understanding yourself, understanding your proportions, understanding your preferences, understanding what makes you feel like the best version of yourself. And once you have that understanding, trends start feeling a lot less important, because you're no longer chasing every recommendation that comes along. You're evaluating those recommendations through the lens of what works for you. And that's where fashion becomes much more enjoyable. You're no longer trying to get everything right. You're gathering information. You're noticing patterns. You're learning what creates balance. You're learning what feels good. And over time, that creates a level of confidence that no trend can give you. So if you've spent years wondering why high high-rise jeans never felt quite right? I hope this video helped answer some of those questions. And if you happen to love higher rise jeans, that's wonderful too. The goal was never to convince you to wear them or avoid them. The goal is simply to understand what they're doing. Because once you understand the effect a piece is creating, you can decide whether that effect supports the look you're trying to achieve. I think that's a much more empowering way to approach style. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you love high-rise jeans? Do you prefer mid-rise? Have you noticed that different rises create different effects on your body? And was there anything in this video that helped explain an experience you've had while shopping? I always enjoy hearing your thoughts, and I think these conversations help all of us learn from one another. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like more style education focused on proportions, outfit balance, and understanding why certain pieces work the way they do, make sure to subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.